10 largest pharmaceutical companies form the so-called Big Pharma, which controls the world pharmaceutical market. In 2004, global spending on prescription drugs amounted to $500 billion. In 2002, Big Pharma's overall profit amounted to $35.9 billion. The profit made by Big Pharma exceeds the combined total profits of the other 490 multinationals on the Fortune 500 list. In 2004, Big Pharma registered a total pre-tax profit of $205 billion, nearly as much as the gross national product of Denmark. Here is a list of the 10 most widely sold medicines in the world, according to the most up-to-date data available from 2004. The most widely sold medicine is the cholesterol-reducing Lipitor, produced by Pfizer. It made $10.3 billion over the course of just 1 year. Next comes another cholesterol-reducing drug, Zocor, produced by Merck. It made $6.1 billion in 1 year. The third most widely sold medicine is Zyprexa, an antidepressant produced by Eli Lilly. It made $4.8 billion in a year. Among the remaining 7 most widely sold medicines in the world, there are 2 which treat ulcers, 1 for high blood pressure, 1 antidepressant, 1 for heart problems, 1 for asthma and 1 for anemia, with a total annual turnover of around $48 billion. All of these drugs were sold in rich countries such as the United States, the European Union and Japan. Geneva is the financial heart of Europe. It is here that we must start our investigation in order to understand the political and economic problems of access to pharmaceutical drugs. All the international organizations which deal with pharmaceuticals have their base in Geneva. The World Health Organization, WHO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, Médecins Sans Frontières, and, naturally, the World Trade Organization, WTO.
And the WTO today, which covers many different areas of international trade. Trade in goods, trade in services. It covers a wide range of issues from tariffs and duties on goods to subsidies to non-tariff rules.
The WTO has 150 member states, almost the entire planet. The World Trade System is governed by WTO agreements.
We started to look into the new rules on pharmaceutical patenting that came out of the World Trade Organization, which are called the trade-related aspects of intellectual property right, the TRIPS agreement. Because we saw that medicines that were under patent were so much more expensive than medicines that were not patented.
The International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, IFPMA, has its base in Geneva.
We have 26 member companies, and we have 55 national associations, which are in 55 countries around the world. And the issues that we work on are basically regulatory issues, because the pharmaceutical industry is the most regulated manufacturing industry that there is. Everything is regulated, from the clinical trials to the patents to the pricing in many countries. And so we work on these regulatory issues.
Ma come? In tutta la mattina non ha finito una lettera.
Mi scusi, ma ho tanto mal di testa che non riesco a lavorare.
E lei per un mal di testa rischia il posto. Prenda un calmante Murri e in pochi minuti le passerà.
Non soffrite inutilmente. Quando avete mal di testa, mal di denti, nevralgie o reumatismi, usate calmante Murri. Il calmante Murri calma rapidamente ogni dolore nevralgico e reumatico. Ricordate, quando avete mal di testa o nevralgie, prendete calmante Murri. Il dolore vi passerà in pochi minuti.
Here are the 5 infectious diseases that kill the most people every year, according to 2004 data. Various forms of pulmonary disease, 4 million deaths. AIDS, 2.8 million deaths. Diarrhea, 1.8 million deaths. Tuberculosis, 1.6 million deaths. Malaria, 1.6 million deaths. The list goes on, accounting for 15 million deaths a year. 85% of the affected live in the southern hemisphere, yet they account for only 11% of world spending on health. In rich countries, 15% of the world's sick spend the remaining 89%.
One, the medicines that are desperately needed, diagnostic tools that are desperately needed to diagnose people properly or diagnose children properly are not available. They are not being developed. Second, medicines that we knew were available, for example, AIDS medicines, were not available in developing countries because they were priced out of reach of the ability of people in developing countries to pay. And third, there were medicines that existed that actually were developed for use to treat tropical diseases, but that were no longer produced, even though the needs were there. The people who needed the medicines existed, but as consumers, they do not exist. As a market, they do not exist because they don't have enough money to pay for the treatment.
What's the difference between a generic medicine and a brand name one? Actually, they contain the same active ingredients, and they're made in the same way. They are identical. The brand name ones are patented, and so they generally cost a lot more. But who regulates the patenting system? Remember one word: TRIPS.
TRIPS agreement. What it means is trade-related intellectual property. Property is an agreement covering intellectual property systems and their impact on international trade. It really was the first major effort in the GATT-WTO system to create a relationship between trade and intellectual property protection.
A patent is a legal title granted by the state, giving its holder a temporary monopoly on the use of an invention for a limited area and time. The patent can cover a product or the process used in making something. From the start, the existence of patents was justified by the fact that exclusive rights to commercial exploitation stimulates new inventions which, when the patent expires, will pass into the public domain. In recent years, even genetically modified organisms have been patented, including plants, animals, and microorganisms, and the list could go on.
There is an important link between the TRIPS agreement and access to drugs.
Because it treated medicines as any other sector.
The TRIPS agreement obliged all countries that are members to the World Trade Organization, now around 150 countries, to adopt the patent protection for pharmaceuticals.
Before the TRIPS agreement, countries either don't grant patents on medicines or they grant for a shorter period, 5 years, 10 years. But now you have to give for 20 years.
But the patent owner can charge high prices. He may act as a monopolist.
So in this 20-year period, no other generic medicine can enter into the market.
The patent owner can charge the price that the market may bear. And this means that many people will not be able to purchase and use these patented drugs.
This is the problem with the TRIPS agreement, that it kind of gives the patent holder monopoly of the market, and generic medicines cannot enter the market. And because there's no competition, the patent holder is able to keep prices as high as it wants.
TRIPS represents the triumph of the particular interests of the great European and American multinationals over the general interests of billions of people in developing countries. Trade ministers were not aware that in signing these agreements, they were at the same time condemning billions of the world's poorest citizens to death. TRIPS has imposed a regime of intellectual property currently dominant in the United States and in Europe on the entire world. Also, the idea that intellectual property rights act as a stimulus for innovation because they guarantee higher profits to be reinvested in research and development cannot be said to be true.
Many of these products are developed in rich countries because these are the countries which have the investment, which have the scientists, which have the technological strength to produce these things. But I think it's important to point out that one of the reasons an open international trading system is important is that it does enable people in poorer countries to benefit from these products.
97% of patents worldwide are held by people or businesses in industrialized countries, and more than half of the royalties are paid to the USA. Even in developing countries, 80% of patents are granted to those who are resident in industrialized countries. Even the United States sometimes finds it hard to enforce TRIPS. Like in October 2001, while still reeling from the Twin Towers attack, there was widespread panic about anthrax and a new bioterrorism attack. There was an explosion in the number of reports of anthrax contagion, culminating on October the 5th with the death of Robert Stevens, a photographer working for the American Media Press Agency. There was even a rumour that President Bush himself had been infected, and the only antibiotic known to be effective against anthrax, Cipro, produced by Bayer and at the same time still under patent until the end of 2003, became virtually unobtainable. The US government decided to ask Bayer to provide an enormous supply of the drug at less than the $5 a pill that was the retail price. Given the German company's reluctance, the US government announced its approval of 2 generic pharmaceuticals, doxycycline and penicillin, as a treatment against anthrax, and that these pharmaceuticals should be available as generics, because they could be produced by a number of pharmaceutical companies, and so be relatively cheap and easy to obtain. The front page of the New York Times read, "American law is very clear. When the United States government needs a patented product, any official authorized to make purchases can ignore the patent and license someone else to make it." The next day, Bayer responded, saying that it was not at all impressed by the US government's actions. Actions violating the infamous TRIPS. But the threat of non-compliance with TRIPS extended into Canada, with more and more offers arriving from pharmaceutical companies producing generics. And so, on October the 25th, the US government gained the upper hand. Under the threat of the generics, Bayer agreed to produce all the pills the US needed, at the cost of only 95 cents each. In the end, however, there were only 3 deaths from anthrax poisoning and a few dozen cases of contagion.
La OMS publicó en el año 98 un documento donde identificaba cuáles eran los mecanismos que existían en ese acuerdo TRIPS que se podían interpretar de una manera positiva para proteger la salud pública. Y lo publicamos y hubo una polémica terrible, hubo pedidos de que se retirara el documento, hubo insultos a la OMS, que el documento era mediocre, que era mentira, que era falso, y empezó la polémica y el debate sobre si en realidad había una flexibilidad o no había una flexibilidad. Esto llevó 3 años hasta Doha, donde se hizo la declaración donde se dice realmente existe este derecho, existe la flexibilidad, existen mecanismos que se pueden utilizar para proteger la salud pública en caso de un efecto negativo de la implementación de estos acuerdos de propiedad intelectual. Los países pueden hacer una licencia obligatoria, pueden hacer una importación paralela, y eso es una cosa perfectamente conforme al acuerdo TRIPS.
Parallel imports. Thanks to Article 6 of the TRIPS agreement, in the interests of public health and for limited periods only, it is possible to import a pharmaceutical drug from the company which offers the best economic